Welcome to episode 1 of the Front Office Podcast. I am Pistols. I am going to be your host. And around here, we do not draft the names, we draft the roles. The show is not going to react to headlines. What we do here is understand the opportunity before everybody else does. Today, we'll just break down the Super Bowl and what actually mattered in the Super Bowl and why the offseason is where fantasy championships are built. So let's get right into it. Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is over with, obviously. We had the Seattle Seahawks go against the New England Patriots for the world title. What surprised me the most throughout the game, it was a very low-scoring game up until like the third quarter when Seattle kind of broke it open a little bit. But it was a very defensive battle. Defensively, both teams were very solid. Seattle was the top defense all year long. I kind of expected it to be a big defensive battle as far as the offenses go. They kind of stuttered a little bit in the first half. They definitely didn't disappoint in that that aspect. The offense is definitely disappointed a little bit, especially the Patriots, who I thought didn't even deserve to be there. They are a team with a new head coach, Mike Vrabel, very good head coach, by the way. I'm not going to take anything away from him, but they did have an easy path to the Super Bowl. They barely beat a Jared Stidham-led offense in Denver the week prior to the Super Bowl, or 2 weeks prior to the Super Bowl, whatever it ends up being. But the biggest surprise to me was something that we kind of dealt with all season long, league wide, was the amount of penalties. I really liked to see the amount of non-penalties that were called in the Super Bowl. We didn't even have our first penalty until I think late in the third quarter, whether it was a defensive pass interference or a holding penalty or whatever you want to call it. A game like that should not be decided on penalties. And as far as the league wide issue goes, what's a pass interference, what's not a pass interference. We just saw penalties being thrown left and right. It dictated some games, if you want to, I guess you can say that. But it was really nice to see in a Super Bowl game where these two teams are just going at it. They're playing for a title. The Lombardi Trophy is on the line. Letting them go and just letting them play the game is really good. It is really awesome for the brand. It's really great for the game of football. As a consumer, we look at it as an entertainment business, and it's just that. It's a business, right? So, these refs, and they come in and they do the best they can, and they focus in on the defense. One thing I did want to touch base on too is the amount of defensive pass interference penalties called. There was like 300 in the league this year as a whole, to like 70 offensive pass interference calls. Now I understand that offenses have the right to the ball, right? And these referees and officials are programmed and trained to really hone in on a defense. And that's kind of why we see an uptick in those penalties called year after year, game after game. We see these teams just going at it, fighting. Football's a violent sport. We get it. But in the Super Bowl, penalties should not dictate the way the game goes, as it did in some of the games in the regular season. Like I said, it really did solidify my expectation for the game as being a defensive battle. Like I said, Seattle kind of opened it up with the AJ Barner touchdown that kind of opened up the scoring for Seattle. Defense held their ground again, scored a touchdown on a Drake May strip sack interception type of whatever play you want to call it. And they ended up taking it for the touchdown and kind of really blowing the game wide open. New England scored late, which we kind of expected. A little bit of garbage time touchdown there. But yeah, the most surprising thing was the amount of penalties, which is in a good way. It surprised me in a good way because, like I said, I just want to see two teams go after it and play some football and just may the best team win. And no, that was not a Drake May pun. That was literally just may the best team win type of comment. But yeah, so And here's the thing about the Super Bowl, and when it comes to fantasy football, and we've seen a couple guys really, we saw one guy really go off, right? And that's Kenneth Walker, a guy that has been often injured, played an entire season, all 20 games, including the playoffs. Really run hard and take control of the game. He ran for like 135 yards off like 25 plus touches in the game. So that was really good to see for him. I am a Kenneth Walker hater, if you will. I've had him on fantasy teams, and I've had him hit a stride early in the season, and then I've seen him completely fall off at the end of a season when it really matters, when the points matter, and miss playoffs and miss fantasy championship opportunities. But that's kind of the narrative that people are going to go after, right? Here's a mistake that people make a lot of the time when they watch the Super Bowl. They see what guys do well, and then they go and draft off of that game. You can't base your drafts off of the Super Bowl as much as you want to, especially because the dynamics and the narratives change between seasons. This is part of the reason why the offseason is so important when it comes to fantasy football. If you're very serious about fantasy football, like I am, I know some people, use it as a side hobby or however they want to look at it. But it does take a lot of work to become a fantasy football champion. Other people in the league don't have the same philosophy as you do. So you have to manage that. But don't draft off this game. We're looking at guys like Sam Darnold, Kenneth Walker, AJ Barner, even from Seattle. And then, we're looking at guys like Drake May and Stephon Diggs and some of the other receivers over there in New England. And they have two really good running backs, Ramondre Stevenson and Travion Henderson. But if you watch that game, one running back really stood out, and that was Kenneth Walker. Who took control of the game and ran hard, and Ramondre Stevenson, I don't think even saw a snap in the second half of the game. Kind of took over Travion Henderson. Uh, Travion Henderson took over in the second half, which he didn't really do anything. Um, we're looking at two guys that split carries throughout the season, and Ramondre kind of came in and solidified his role as the feature back in the playoffs, and then was non-existent. Drake May was their leading rusher with like 40 yards or so. That's not going to win you a football game. You know, both offenses kind of stuttered in the beginning until Seattle really broke it open. Um, Mike Vrabel is kind of this really aggressive coach, and his style of play is a little bit on the aggressive side. I saw him kind of hesitate and not go for a couple fourth downs early on that he probably should have went for. They were down 12, and there was a 4th-1 where he punted instead of gone for the first down. Going for plays like that and going for those fourth downs and those fourth and shorts can really shift the momentum of a game. If you just let Seattle kind of regroup and gather their thoughts for the next drive, it's just going to be bad news for the opposing offense. And in this game, it really was for the Patriots to kind of come out there and kind of be stale and stagnant on offense. Don't get me wrong, Drake May ended the game with like 295 yards passing, which is pretty good for a quarterback. But he didn't. He stuttered. He fell flat on his face, kind of like a lot of people expected him to. I think that like I said before, they had the easiest path to the Super Bowl and almost lost to a Jared Stidham ran offense in Denver. But yeah, if you're going to draft based on this, I wouldn't. The only guys that I would draft are JSN and Kenneth Walker, and we have to monitor Kenneth Walker's situation to see if he's even going to be back in Seattle because he is a free agent. Come March when free agency opens up, are they going to bring him back? Are they not? We'll have to wait and see. But just because the Super Bowl is over doesn't mean we can't talk fantasy, and that's exactly what we're going to do. That's exactly why we're here, is to talk fantasy. Biggest fantasy winners from the previous season. it was playing in the Super Bowl. Well, it was JSN. Jackson Smith and Jigba came out here in the Super Bowl, kind of stale. Didn't really see him a lot, but throughout the entire season, you probably drafted him in a mid round, third, fourth round, maybe fifth round. Didn't really know what to expect with Sam Darnold coming in, with Mike McDonald there and Clint Kubiak as offensive coordinator. But we really saw an uptick in his usage and his role in that offense, and he led the league in receiving yards. He's a big fantasy winner in my opinion, because if you had him on your team, you probably got him late, as I said, and he put up first round numbers. I expect that to carry over into next season, um, when Seattle and they come out and they go to defend their title. Um, you know, it's it really comes down to the role changes, and that's what we're going to get into on the channel. And in the podcast is we're going to go over the philosophy in the offseason and why it matters so much during draft season for your fantasy teams. Um, a couple other fantasy winners that I had on my list. Jonathan Taylor was a big one. We saw his usage go up tremendously. A guy that has had injury issues, and people are probably scared of him and scared to draft him. But they brought in Daniel Jones, who is a very good quarterback, and we saw him get hurt late, which really hurt their chances of making the playoffs. They brought in Phillip Rivers off the couch, but Jonathan Taylor's role significantly increased in that offense, and significantly increased from the year before, and that's really kind of what translates into fantasy points is the uptick in usage. How many touches are they getting? How many routes are they running? Um, Another fantasy winner with Christian McCaffrey, we saw miss 10 games last year, and with the Achilles injury, and come out this year and put up 2,100 scrimmage yards. They used him a ton. I know they had issues at quarterback, with Brock Purdy being hurt, but Mac Jones came in and played very well in that system. And Christian McCaffrey just held it down. They saw a lot of injuries, both sides of the ball. And if you drafted Christian McCaffrey in the first round, you got first round production out of Christian McCaffrey. If you drafted Jonathan Taylor in the first or second round, you got first, second round production out of him this year. So it was really good to see those guys strive, and be a lot better than they were in previous years. Another guy that I want to touch base on is Chris Olave. He's a guy that was probably drafted later rounds, 4th, 5th, 6th round even. They had some struggles early on. New Orleans did with Spencer Rattler at quarterback. They brought in Tyler Shuck, who showed some really good stuff in the backfield there, slinging the rock. Chris Olave saw an uptick in touchdowns this year. He scored 9 touchdowns. He had over 1,100 yards receiving. As I said, it all goes down to usage and the role that they play in an offense. So your fantasy winners this year are just those guys. And of course, I'm not going to name guys like Puka Nacua and Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Jamar Chase. Those guys you all expect to be up there with their draft position. Another guy I want to touch base on is Devontae Adams. A lot of people said he's old, he's washed. You get him in the right system with a guy like Matthew Stafford, who just won MVP, who threw for 40 touchdowns. Devontae Adams had 14 of those touchdowns. So your fantasy winners are guys that you drafted in later rounds, and you really saw an uptick in their usage and really helped you kind of win that championship. Now I'm going to shift over here and go to my fantasy losers for the season. And here's the thing with the fantasy losers. I'm gonna name the entire tight end group. I know a lot of people out there are seemingly getting frustrated with the usage of tight ends and seeing a downtick in the tight end usage. It's really becoming an irrelevant position in fantasy football. And it's really sad to see because, tight ends are really sometimes where fantasy championships are made. But this year, outside of Trey McBride for Arizona, we saw the usage of tight ends just go way down, way down. Trey McBride had over 1,200 yards receiving and 11 touchdowns this year. He led fantasy. He led the tight ends this year. The next closest guy was Kyle Pitts, and he didn't even reach 1,000 yards. There was one tight end, and that's Trey McBride, who went over 1,000 yards. Everybody else was under that. We saw guys like Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews continue his down tick, his down slide at the tight end position. We saw Brock Bowers from a year ago, where he had however many yards, he had 1,500 yards, I think. And I know the randomness and the injuries you can't predict, but excuse me, but Brock Bowers really declined from year one to year two. He was a high draft pick. George Kittle was a high draft pick. We saw him get injured and miss like 6-7 games this year. Saw a downtick there. We've seen some guys rise a little bit. We're looking at Tyler Warren, the rookie in Indianapolis, who saw an increase in his usage. And again, we're gonna tie it back into the role that they play in offense and the usage and the snap counts. Excuse me, on offense here. We're looking at guys like Tucker Kraft, who started the season strong, who really was a disappointment. And I know he got injured and his season, he was a guy that was looking really good that could lead all tight ends. TJ Hawkinson is another guy that we're looking at. Sam Laporta, who had a great season last year. All of these tight ends are just on a downslide this year, and the downtick in the usage roles and whether they're in. And I'm not saying tight ends aren't important in the league, because they are. Tight ends are very important in the league because they look at the blocking tight ends, open up the run game, and they open up guys in the middle of the field. But we see the usage of tight ends just continue to decline, and it really, really affects the fantasy outlook on a tight end. We start to ask the questions in fantasy football: is our tight ends even worth drafting? Sometimes we see these guys like, we saw guys like Brock Bowers and Sam Laporta and Jake Ferguson even get drafted high in drafts, and just not put out the production that you expect them to put out. So my biggest fantasy loser is the entire tight end draft class outside of Trey McBride. Now, like I said, there are some good things like Tyler Warren and even Harold Fannin Jr. out of Cleveland, who saw his role increase over David Njoku. AJ Barner just won a Super Bowl with the Seahawks as well. We saw his usage kind of uptick a little bit. But as a whole, as far as I'm concerned, if you didn't have Trey McBride, your tight end position was useless. Outside of a couple games that Kyle Pitts might have had, we're looking at a group of players that is really just almost irrelevant now, which really sucks to see, because it is a fantasy roster. We look at the offense and we look at guys who are going to put up points on our teams. The tight end position just isn't it. This is a position that shouldn't be drafted high anymore. It's a position outside of Trey McBride. But again, they just changed their head coach. We don't know what their philosophy is going to be. We don't know if Kyler Murray's coming back. We don't know if they're going to stick with Jacoby Brissett. But as far as the tight ends go, we just saw a complete downtick, a complete slide at the position as a whole. My other biggest fantasy loser was Minnesota Vikings receiver Justin Jefferson, probably a first-round draft pick. We saw him just not put up the production. And now I know it's not his fault. They had quarterback issues. I don't think they're, J.J. McCarthy has not proven himself yet. We don't know if he's going to be able to get him the ball. There's been rumors that Justin Jefferson might get traded. So we don't really know the identity of the Minnesota Vikings yet. We saw guys... like DK Metcalf even, kind of have a downtick in his production. We saw CD Lamb have a downtick in his production with the emergence of George Pickens over there in Dallas. It's guys like that, and again, we tie it all back into the usage roles and the role they have on on their respective offenses. That these guys, their roles are changing, and this is why the offseason is so important, is to evaluate the roles on offense and see where these guys are, losing value, and where we should be drafting them in drafts. We looked at a guy like Jalen Waddle have a fall off. We looked at a guy like Quentin Johnston who started hot and fell off, and that was, of course, that's part of, um, that's part of being injured and having quarterback issues. And not that Justin Herbert had any issues this year, but they had a different approach to, their offense. Guys like Zay Flowers had an uptick, but they just don't pass the ball a whole lot. Which is why we saw John Harbaugh kind of get fired this year in Baltimore. It just goes back to the roles that they play and the roles that they play on their respective teams. Rome Odunze had an uptick. Brian Thomas had a downtick. We saw him have a great rookie season, come back this year, not do as well. Didn't even hit 1,000 yards this year. Barely scored any touchdowns. We saw Rashee Rice be suspended for the first, 10 games or so, or 9 games, or whatever it ended up being. We saw his production way down because of that. Again, it all just comes back down to the role that these players, have on their respective teams, and what we can expect moving forward is scheme dependency. Like, are we looking at a team in Indianapolis that's going to continue to use Jonathan Taylor? Are we looking at a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars, who really saw a downswing in wide receiver usage with the emergence of Trevor Lawrence again and his running ability? These are the risks that we have to evaluate and look at the opportunities based on their usage. Again, this is where it comes in. We're not drafting names; we're drafting roles, right? We have to look at the roles each of these players take in their offense. I think an overreaction might be the disappointing season Saquon Barkley had this year, but it's not a real concern. What a real concern is the downtick in the tight end position. That's not an overreaction. I think we are seeing a lot less tight ends being used across the board. But as far as the season that Saquon Barkley had, that's completely disappointing. He had over 2,000 yards rushing last year, and to barely crack 1,000 this year was really disappointing for him as a running back and as a high draft pick. We saw him barely crack 1,000 yards. He had 1,100. I mean, that's not anything. It's a great season. Don't get me wrong, but we saw a big decrease in touchdowns. We saw a big decrease in the passing game out of Saquon. These are all disappointments that you draft these guys super high in your leagues, and they cost you the league ultimately. So stick around here and join the podcast. And we're gonna get into the philosophy as the weeks progress and how we prepare for draft season. And that's the bigger point that I'm making here with this podcast is most fantasy managers will wait until draft day to start paying attention, or the week of the draft to start paying attention. By that time, the value is already gone in these players. The value changes. The off season is where the coaching changes happen. The depth charts are going to shift. The roles are going to evolve and be reevaluated as new head coaches and new coordinators come in, and new players come in from other teams as free agency kicks off in March. If you draft the names, you're just chasing last year. And we don't want to chase last year. We want to draft the role and project the new year. And that's how And that's what we do here on this channel is we're going to be the deep diving into the roles of players and the schemes and where players should be drafted and evaluated accordingly. Yeah, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Um, you know, this is the front office. If you care about winning your fantasy season, the work starts now, guys. The work starts now. Um, and we'll catch you on the next one. We'll catch you on the next one, guys. We're live every Sunday, every Tuesday, um, 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Catch the Front Office podcast there. Every handle. You can find me on Twitch, YouTube, and on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it at PistolsLiveHQ. Yeah, again, for the Front Office podcast, I am your host, Pistols. Catch you on the next one, guys.